Hey, what's up everyone? This is Faja and we are back again today with another YouTube video going over my travels in Asia. So today we're going to talk about the 5 pros and 5 cons of living in Asia from a regular person's perspective. So last time we talked about it from a DJ perspective, and this time we're going to talk about the regular everyday kind of things that you're going to experience if you were to move here. This is obviously all coming from the perspective of a foreigner, someone from the West, so keep that in mind. Almost a year ago now that I moved to Asia, I spent most of my time in places like Bangkok, Seoul, Bali, a little bit of Macau and Taipei. So just keep all that in mind because I'm going to be mostly talking about Southeast Asia. I'm also kind of referring to East Asia. Obviously, Asia is quite big, a lot of different countries, and the culture varies quite a bit from country to country. But we are mostly talking about Southeast Asia and East Asia. So this is all pretty subjective. It's obviously all from my own experiences, but it's also information that I've gathered from my friends that were either born here or who have also moved here from the West. So you may see some of my cons as pros, or maybe some of my pros as cons, depending on who you are. Just depends on the kind of person you are, really. So as usual, we're gonna start with the bad and then end with the good. So let's get right into it.
Are you ready?
Con number 1 is you're gonna get food poisoning a lot. This is mainly a problem in Southeast Asia, but you can get it elsewhere too. So this is pretty unavoidable to get because in a lot of Southeast Asia, they don't really have health codes as much. And also food can be stored differently. And then in places like Bali or Vietnam, tap water can be pretty dangerous, especially Bali. I actually did a video on this where I almost died from eating corn. You can eat veggies that will just be washed in tap water, and the bacteria from that can literally hospitalize you or kill you. But even in Thailand, I've been to markets where you see sashimi out, like actual raw fish just sitting out in the open in these big buckets, and there's like flies going around it, and it's literally out for hours. I think I tend to get food poisoning a little bit more often than my friends do, probably because I love eating street food, but yeah, my friends will still get it regardless. So just be careful and be sure to always carry charcoal pills if you do happen to come to Asia. Now, con number 2, which is kind of a pro, but I still see it as a con, is it's extremely cheap here. And now you're probably wondering why that is a con, and it is a con because that means that there's an overwhelming amount of people that are actually in extreme poverty. Once again, this is more of an issue that you're going to see in Southeast Asia, but in places like Thailand and Indonesia, the vast majority of the population lives in extreme poverty, while there is a small minority that has most of the wealth. I'd actually heard in Thailand about 95% of people don't even make enough money to pay taxes, which is crazy. But it's kind of ironic because Bangkok is in the top 10 cities for most billionaires in the world. There's an overwhelming amount of people in Southeast Asia that are living around the poverty line, and that essentially just brings down the price of all goods and labor, which makes it really cheap for us coming from the West. But you need to keep that in mind when you come here and, try to be nice to locals, maybe support the smaller businesses and whatnot. Basically, things are only cheap here because so many people are super poor. This is one of the reasons that I don't plan on staying in Southeast Asia super long. I have some weird sentiments about coming from a G10 country like Canada, staying here and benefiting from the fact that there's essentially just a whole bunch of people that are suffering. I think some people won't be bothered by this. It's just the way the world unfortunately works. And I understand if you're not, because of course, we all in some way kind of benefit a bit from cheap labor, no matter where we are in the world. But for me, it's just something that's a little strange, I guess, coming from another country and not something that I want to benefit off of in the long term. So con number 3 is that it's quite corrupt. This is, again, mainly an issue in Southeast Asia, but there is a ton of corruption out here. This is with the exception of Singapore, though. Singapore is extremely uncorrupt. Now, I don't want to single out any one country or anything like that because it could put my visa at risk or travels at risk, but I'm just going to say that I've firsthand witnessed a lot of situations, encounters with government affiliated officials where people have had to do questionable things because they were forced to. Basically, there's just a lot of shady business. And if you live in Southeast Asia, you're almost certain to encounter this at one point in your life. And this actually kind of ties into con number 2 because I think the reason that there is so much corruption is because of the high amounts of poverty. Basically, people are trying to make a buck, and so they resort to resorting to corruption. But because of that same corruption, it creates even more poverty. People are selling out their own population for their own benefit. So it's kind of like a crazy circle. And selling out their own population essentially just destabilizes the country. This is the case in a lot of third world or developing countries. It's kind of like this in my dad's home country, Trinidad and Tobago. So just keep this in mind in Southeast Asia. Try not to overstep any boundaries and just know that you might have to do certain things that you don't want to. I won't get into details what those things are, but just If you know what I'm saying, I think. Hopefully. All right, con number 4, depending what country you go to in Asia, if you are black or brown, you will be treated differently. I've noticed this mostly in East Asia, places like Korea, but if I'm in Southeast Asia, people are generally a lot more welcoming and warm towards me. Although I will say I've noticed several times where people seem to be a little bit terrified to get in the same elevator as me, but that could be because I am 6'3", so I'll try and give them the benefit of the doubt. But in Korea, for example, you are going to encounter some pretty blatant racism, especially if you are black. One thing to understand, though, is that sometimes this kind of racism in East Asia is a little bit different than it is back home in the West. It is more on the account of the fact that China, Japan, Korea, for example, are all extremely homogenous. Probably 95 to 99% of their population is of the same ethnicity. So when they encounter someone that looks way different than them, it is a bit of a shock. Also, some of this racism is also just built a little bit on distaste for foreigners in general. If you are white, you are likely going to be received way better. Asian beauty standards just have a preference for fairness, and they typically see it as being more pure or attractive. And being colored, not as much. I will say though, I've been to Korea so many times. I love it there. I love the people, but I have been sworn at multiple times, given dirty looks, and given a lot of hassle when trying to get into clubs. And it was just because I'm not Korean. I even had a guy at a club once just like stare at me directly, and I look back at him and he looks at me and just spits on the ground, and I know what he's doing. He's trying to like act a little bit intimidating. And so I just look at him and then keep looking around, trying to make it a little bit awkward for him. Of course, I'm not going to start a confrontation because you shouldn't do that when you're in any foreign country, but especially not Korea. I think if I didn't have as many friends as I do in Korea because of the fact that I make music and whatnot and meet all these people super easily, I think I would maybe not like Korea as much as I do because I would probably experience a lot more racism. Most of the clubs I've been to in places like Gangnam, for example, probably would not have let me in. I actually had one experience with my friends where we went to this one club in Gangnam. It actually doesn't exist anymore, but the bouncer basically asked them, can he speak Korean? Now, luckily, I can speak a little bit of Korean, so there was no issues, but there is that sort of hassle where they want to keep it mostly Korean and, just keep it to their own. 99.9% of the time I actually party in Gangnam, I am the only non-Korean person in the club. And I wouldn't be surprised if I might even have been the first brown person to ever walk into most of those clubs. It's actually pretty common to see hip-hop clubs in Korea that won't let foreigners in, which is pretty ironic. I could actually go on a massive rant about the use of hip-hop culture and K-pop and whatnot in Korea and how it's kind of ironic because of their distaste for black people, but I think that could be a whole separate video. A lot of people actually talk about this issue. It's insane, but there's a lot to unpack there, honestly. But anyways, shout out to my friends for being able to open that door for me to experience parts of Korea I might have not been able to experience otherwise because of my skin color. If you're actually interested, you can find loads of videos on YouTube from some black content creators talking about their experiences in Korea, racist encounters they've had, including things like being spat on, which is crazy. But I want to end it by saying, just for the record, I still love Korea, and it's not like everyone there is racist. You're going to meet a ton of extremely nice people, so don't take it as that's how everyone is. So con number 5, culture in many countries in Asia does not encourage individuality as much. So because of that, you will hear many personal and political views that will probably sound a little bit taboo for someone coming from the West. Because of the influence of Confucianism across Asia, there is more a culture of collectivism rather than individuality. Confucianism is essentially a old philosophy that encourages overall social stability, manners, politeness. There's a lot of good to it, but it can come with its downsides. The downsides are essentially that it comes at the cost of the individual sometimes. Now, this isn't a critique of it. I think there's actually a lot of great lessons that you can take from it. However, it does end up typically creating a more conservative society, keeping things the way they are, maintaining order, so that doesn't necessarily encourage a lot of progressive political thoughts. So it's honestly pretty common to hear from people out here that things should be kept fairly traditional. Women should stay home and take care of the children. Men should go to work. Women don't go into the military, but men should. There's numerous examples of things like this, which will seem kind of taboo for anyone in the West, especially in this day and age. I will say though, we are seeing some sort of pushback to some of these sentiments. So in Korea, for example, there is the recent emergence of the B4 feminist movement, which started in 2019, which is essentially a pushback to the societal expectations put on women, specifically the more conservative societal expectations. So the B4 movement pertains itself with renowned renouncing 4 things. Renouncing sex, marriage, dating, and having children. 4 things that are obviously pretty expected of women in a very conservative society. Basically, many women are feeling the pressures of having children, beauty expectations, dating, following a traditional life path, and then also with the wage gap in Korea. So this is just a big pushback to all of this. Again, this is another point where I could probably create another whole video, but I think you basically get the idea of what it is like. Now that we got all of the cons out of the way, it is time to move on to the pros. So pro number 1 is that it is fairly safe across Asia, especially in East Asia. This is more specific to the major cities. The countrysides will obviously vary across many countries, but overall it is quite safe. Or at least when contrasting to where I'm from, Winnipeg, Canada, which is the murder capital of Canada, and we have stabbings and all sorts of crazy things all the time. It is very safe. You can walk around at night without worrying about getting mugged, stabbed, or robbed. You can also leave your stuff in your car and no one will break in and steal it, which is extremely common in Winnipeg. Overall, crime is just lower. And actually, there was a recent video done by a TikToker called The Bearded Travels where he left some of his belongings out in Bangkok, and I think he came back like the next day and no one had stolen them. This was actually put all over Thai news because it was essentially a British influencer showcasing just how safe and orderly Bangkok is. I've also left my laptop and phone out in Seoul when at cafes and stuff, and no one has ever stolen it. If I had done that in Winnipeg or Toronto or Vancouver, it could be gone in an instant, honestly. Now, like I said, if you go into some rougher areas in major cities or the countryside, it might be a little bit different, but in major metropolitan areas of Bangkok, Seoul, Tokyo, you're gonna be pretty fine. However, if you are a woman traveling, I heard it can be a little bit different. You might encounter some issues if you're especially a solo traveler. I've heard of that happening, but overall, people are generally more respectful and polite here than I would say in the West. I have also heard, though, it can be unsafe in cities like Ho Chi Minh and Jakarta. Lots of petty crime and even sometimes some violent crime. But again, the biggest major cities that I think people typically travel to in Asia, they are quite safe. So if you're ever in Bangkok, Seoul, Taipei, Tokyo, or in Singapore, you are gonna feel extremely safe almost wherever you go. Feel free to walk around at any time of the day and you are likely not gonna encounter any issues. At least that was my experience. And now for pro number 2 and 3, I'm actually going to make this a 2-part point because they are very much interconnected. All right, so pro number 2 is cities are built for people, not cars. Because cities are so highly densely populated in places like Bangkok, you have to make it fairly easy for people to get around by foot. It just won't be efficient if the cities were built fully for cars. In my hometown, Winnipeg, if you don't have a car, you are taking the bus, and as a lot of Winnipeggers know, the bus isn't always super reliable. In Seoul or Tokyo, though, you can take the bus, you can take the train, you can take a fairly affordable ride-sharing service, and trains and buses are super clean, super cheap, and just extremely easy to get around from one point of the city to the next. If you've ever taken a train in New York City, though, you will probably know it is not great. It is essentially real life Gotham City. Or if you've taken an Uber in New York, it's gonna cost you like $50 to get from one point to the next, and it won't even be that far. Whereas if you were to take a Kakao taxi in Seoul, you can go from essentially one end of the city to the next, sometimes driving for an hour, and it will cost you like $40, which is an extremely good price. I think I've actually paid like $20 to $30 for an hour-long commute once, which was quite great in Seoul, like unbelievable. So this goes to point number 3, which is that lifestyle is built on going out rather than staying home. Since cities in Asia are typically built very densely, people generally have smaller condo spaces, not very large rooms to hang around. So you can't just stay home and hang out with your friends like you would in my hometown, for example. You have to go out. Pretty much everyone will go out to restaurants, clubs, or bars to hang out, eat food, whatever it is. You don't typically have anyone over at your place. I actually found out the hard way, though, that if you invite someone over to your place, it is essentially like saying, do you want to come over and take your pants off? But yeah, basically you are forced to go out. I actually will say, though, I kind of miss just hanging out at home and doing nothing, maybe watching TV with my brother or friends. That's actually kind of something that I do miss, but it is cool that because of the way these cities are structured in Asia, everyone goes out. It's great for the economy. It makes the city very vibrant. So yeah, it's just a very cool little extra perk. So pro number 4 is that people are generally quite friendly and polite. And this kind of ties into my point about Confucianism, but the good part of it. Now, it's not necessarily like this all across Asia, but in places like Taiwan and then especially Korea and Japan, people are going to be quite friendly and quite polite to you. I know I mentioned some of the racist encounters, but that is not what the average encounter will be like when you are traveling in these places. Some of the most friendly people I've ever met have been in places like Seoul. I have heard though from friends who have lived in Japan or who are actually Japanese themselves that sometimes this level of politeness is actually just surface level. So basically, once you walk away, they might be talking shit about you. But it is nice that people are generally very respectful, polite, cordial when you're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis, even if it is fake. This might be seen as a con, but I think that's mainly if you're actually working in Asia. It's a pro if you're just passing by. Now, why is this a con if you're working in Asia? I had a friend who actually went to Japan to teach English, and she accidentally snubbed another teacher the wrong way. And that teacher, instead of, just being upfront with my friend about it, they just remained passive aggressive to them for the remainder of the semester. It actually caused a lot of pressure for herself, and I think it was one of the reasons she ended up leaving Japan. Just the cultural differences were a little bit tough for her. But like I said, overall, people are very friendly, cordial, and if you're just visiting and traveling and not necessarily immersed in the work culture, you're not going to really have to deal with that fake side of it, and you're just going to really see the friendly part of people. And a lot of people are actually really genuine, so don't think that every single person is just being fake. That's not the case. Now, pro number 5, lastly, is that you can get anything you want pretty much at any time of the day. This is probably another point that is mostly in contrast to my hometown, but in places like Seoul, Bangkok, Taipei, and even in Bali, actually, you can order anything at any time of the day and have it delivered to you. You can order home supplies from 7-Eleven to be delivered to you. You can have alcohol delivered to you, except for in Bangkok, there's a little bit of a time restriction with that. You can have literally any kind of food delivered to you, or if you're into some weird activities, you can probably have that done as well. Back home, if you want any food or anything like that after 10 p.m., your only options are going to be pretty much McDonald's. When I'm in Bangkok or Seoul, if it's 5 a.m., I got hundreds of options, any kind of food that I want. This is super good if you are partying all night, or if you're like me and just happen to be making music super late into the evening and then need to order some food. Also, when you're ordering delivery in Bangkok, you can actually pay like an extra $1 or $2, and sometimes the food will arrive literally within 20 minutes. A guy on a bike will deliver it in 20 minutes. I actually tested this with my friend the other night. I ordered some stir-fry beef and rice. It's a dish called krapao. You should look it up. It's so good. And basically, I ordered it, and then literally 20 minutes later, it was delivered on my shelf at the bottom of my condo. Also, most cities in Asia also have their own equivalent to Amazon or Amazon themselves. So you can order pretty much anything and pay for expedited shipping if you want, and literally have it on your doorstep the next day. So I could order headphones right now and they will be here tomorrow. So that's actually quite nice. So anyways, that concludes my 5 pros and my 5 cons of living in Asia. Again, these are my own subjective experiences and also just information I've kind of gathered from my friends that are either born here or have also moved here from the West. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Maybe you agree with me, disagree with me, or have some different perspectives on anything I said. But just let me know what you think, and also let me know what I should cover next time. So be sure to rate, comment, subscribe, all of that, and I will see you next time.